Welcome, everyone, and welcome to Wholesale Change, the webcast and podcast from Distribution Strategy Group, where we offer thought leadership for wholesale change agents like you, because if you're on this show, you probably are a wholesale change agent. My name's Ian Heller. I'll be your host today and your only host because my business partner, Jonathan Bine, the doctor of distribution, is a little under the weather. So Jonathan, we hope you feel better soon, and I'll try to handle the show as well as I can today without your expert and seasoned insight. We have a wonderful show today. We're delighted that you're joining us. We invite you to ask your questions. Please jump in. Use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the window. We'll handle all the questions that we can. But before we get to our stellar guest, we need to do just a little bit of business to pay the bills. This episode of Wholesale Change is brought to you by Epicor. Are you finally ready to integrate all your business functions with an enterprise resource planning system? Or maybe you're struggling with legacy computer systems that just aren't cutting it anymore. Your IT costs seem never ending. Your servers are at the end of their lifespan. Your systems don't talk to each other, and you can't get decent reporting to make informed business decisions. Does that sound like you? At Epicor, they get you and your unique distribution challenges. Epicor has been around for 50 years. Their ERP solutions were designed with distributors for distributors like you. Epicor for Distribution goes beyond standard ERPs to provide innovative, highly focused solutions that are made for and essential to your business. Learn more about how Epicor has helped thousands of wholesalers succeed by visiting epicor.com/distribution. Thank you to Epicor for making this episode possible. And now I'd like to welcome and bring in our guest. We're delighted to have on the show today, Mr. Alex Moazed, who's the founder of Applico. He's the co-author of Modern Monopolies, How to Dominate the 21st Century Economy, which is a fantastic book. You absolutely must read it. And he's the host of the Winner Take All podcast, a podcast you should absolutely subscribe to. It's wonderful. You'll learn a lot. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today on the Wholesale Change Show.
Great to be here, Ian. Thank you.
You bet. Hey, I know that you've been on a lot of great television shows. You've been on Fox Business News, CNBC, et cetera. But welcome to the big leagues on our podcast.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've been gearing up for this one. That's for sure.
Hey, Alex, why don't you walk us through your career a little bit? I know you went to Babson College and you wrote Winner Take All back in 2015 with your co-author, Nick Johnson. It's a brilliant book. I mean, the Financial Times, which was a very, very tough critic, loved your book, and they thought it was very important. How did you learn what you learned in what at the time was a brief career to write such a breakthrough book that explained platform business models so well?
Yeah, so I actually started Applico at Babson and was maybe a junior in college. This was 08, 09. BlackBerry apps were still big at the time, and decided to go and max out my credit cards and build some apps. Some of those apps became best-selling apps on the App Store. And then people started coming to me and saying, "Hey, so could you make an app for me?" And I said, "Yeah, actually, I've kind of figured out how to do that." I couldn't code, but I was able to surround myself with good people. And then, in my early to mid 20s, we were growing the business hand over foot, doubling, tripling revenue year over year. Had a little shy of 100 employees full time at our peak.
Wow.
Became one of the biggest app developers in the country, and was working with Google and tech startups. And then on the other side of our business, we were working with large, traditional, what I would call today, linear companies like GM and Intel and others, right? And so we were literally inside of these companies building their technology. And it was so clear to us that you needed completely different processes, you needed completely different business rationale, business strategy for how to build the product and the tech, which was all downstream from the strategy. But no one was able to really explain that, oh, well, Google's business model is different than Intel's or GM's, and here's why. Oh, and by the way, a platform for content like Google is also different than a marketplace for services like Uber, who was getting a lot of traction at the time. And so no one was able to explain it. And so we were having to do the strategy and help our clients figure these things out. Otherwise, the product would all be bungled and you'd have to go and redo it all, which wasn't a good situation. So we were kind of forced to put frameworks into place and to make sense of all that was going on in kind of the early 2010s. But it had actually started in the 90s, right? The book kind of looks at Microsoft in the 90s and then goes all the way back to 2,000 years ago. If you think about a bazaar as a platform business model, which is connecting two parties, merchants on one side and consumers on the other. It didn't have data and technology and this changing consumer behavior, which is what we talk about in the book as to why this platform business model in the 21st century economy reigns supreme. But the roots of this business model have been around for thousands of years. You could actually argue it was actually one of the oldest business models. Actually, Sotheby's and Christie's, I forget which one, was actually the oldest company, I think, on the New York Stock Exchange until it was taken private recently. But that kind of bazaar auction model is one of the oldest examples of the platform business model. Just now in the 21st century economy, it's been supercharged with these different technologies and the scale of data. So there are some academics that had talked about it. No one had written a pragmatic business book.
Right.
And that's what we set out to do. And then Macmillan picked it up and was published in 2016.
Yeah, well, and I think it's a great example because a bazaar is literally a marketplace.
Quite literally, yep.
Yeah, and then if you look, and it's really just an early version of a third-party marketplace, right? You have many sellers, you have many buyers, you have an intermediary who's connecting them, and to that intermediary, the value came from the connections. It didn't need to own any assets. I mean, it could literally lease a space. And if you look at marketplaces that we know of today, that one's probably more like eBay, right? Because the eBay doesn't own any inventory, doesn't have any distribution centers. They just bring together buyers and sellers, and they do billions of dollars. It's just an electronic version of that bazaar.
Yep, absolutely. And now what you've seen is the modern monopolies, which the Financial Times did not want to refer to these companies as monopolies back in 2016. Their lawyers were all hopped up about it. We said they were ridiculous, but anyway, water under the bridge. Clearly, Amazon isn't just a third party, doesn't just have third party sellers. And now what you've seen with FAMGA, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Apple, and others, is that the best monopolies are actually a hybrid. They're both a platform business model, which marketplace in B2B distribution is the most common permutation of that. But as I mentioned, there's other types of platform business models. But Amazon and other FAMGA members actually have what I would call linear businesses, where they take assets on balance sheet, they're reselling that, or they don't have an asset-light business model. Apple, right, is making the cell phone and making a huge amount of margin just selling hardware and equipment, right? Whereas their platform business is the app store and the millions of third-party apps that you can now use through the hardware device, right? So, but the best tech companies are actually a hybrid. They have a linear business and a platform business, and some of them have multiple platform businesses stacked on top of each other.
Yeah, and I know your podcast is called Winner Take All, which is indicative that if you have a powerful platform, you become a monopoly, right? And because once you've achieved that state, there's really no room for a competitor. I mean, I've seen, for example, many companies try to create an alternative to LinkedIn, but once you've put all that information in and you've established all those connections, I mean, LinkedIn has to really screw up and make a lot of people angry and create an emotional reason for them to leave. Otherwise, it's not worth going to the effort of participating in a second version of LinkedIn, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the craziest thing in the world. Your content platforms, your social media platforms, actually are banning their most popular users, banning users in droves, all their content creators, right, and the consumers, the producers and the consumers. Yet Instagram is still killing it, right? Right. So you're as a monopoly, you can take advantage of your producers, your content creators on a YouTube, right? There are countless number of YouTube creators who have been banned because they talk about things that Google doesn't want you to talk about, right? It could be political or it could be completely not political, right? A few years ago, they were banning people for talking about crypto. We had a guy on our show who had over 100,000 subscribers, was banned, lost all of his subscribers, lost all the videos that he'd put into YouTube because he was talking about crypto and those kinds of topics, which YouTube didn't take kindly to at that point in time, right? So despite all that, and Amazon obviously just takes so much advantage of third-party sellers, yet people are still selling on Amazon. People are still buying on Amazon. It's still growing like a weed, unfortunately. And I think that's the thing that we've seen is once you get to that monopolistic scale, how do you dethrone? How do you make a more competitive playing field? And I think it's been very difficult for us as a society, as an economy, as a regulatory or governmental body to try and figure out how to grapple with that. And frankly, we've floundered at addressing the problem.
Yeah, I notice on Winner Take All, you talk about, the point of your podcast, or at least one of the goals is to take down tech monopolies, or at least find ways for people to scheme around them, right?
Yeah, I mean, at least like get one or two chinks in the armor. I mean, man, we gotta do something. And it's been a lot of wins for the tech monopolies, and not really any wins, maybe just a few for the incumbents. Now the startups, for the producers, basically everyone but the monopoly and the consumer gets taken advantage of pretty aggressively.
Yeah. Now, in our business, we really focus on wholesale distributors. So I want to pivot the conversation to B2B at the start. So manufacturers, distributors, whether they're selling products or services. I know you do a lot of advisory work for B2B startup marketplaces and work with a lot of venture capital companies, but you also work with a lot of incumbents, to use your word, whether it's distributors or manufacturers. And what's been your experience in terms of having to educate companies about the dynamics of platform models in general? And are they open to learning and understanding that this is a whole new type of competitor that they haven't wrangled with before?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I've been in and around the B2B distribution world for at least 5 years now, talking about B2B marketplaces. And Applico, my company, helps large traditional enterprises, so in B2B, that's large billion-dollar distributors, figure out how to work with and collaborate and partner with new digital disruptors and digital enablers, basically tech startups, right? How do we bring both sides of that aisle together? Do large distributors recognize the threat from, the Amazons, Home Depot? I'd throw into that bucket now these days, depending upon what vertical you're in. Other kind of large retailers, tech monopolies, trying to come into B2B distribution aggressively. I'd say generally they recognize that. To me, the surprising thing is it's not just coming from the tech monopolies and the retail giants into B2B. It's also now the manufacturers. That's the thing. If you rewind 5 years ago and you said, Alex, the participants, the supply that's going to participate on marketplaces and new disruptive digital models in B2B, is going to be some of the B2B to small, mid-sized B2B distributors that, want to get some extra revenue and participate in these things. But it's also going to be the manufacturers that are going to tip the scales. I would have said, you're crazy. Why would they ever do that? Look at what's happening in B2C. Look at how badly Nike hates Amazon with a burning fire passion.
Right.
But that's not what's happening. In B2B distribution, in a lot of the verticals, the manufacturers are not just enabling these new disruptors and marketplace models to get traction, they're actually literally investing in them and putting dollars into them, right? And that's the thing which somewhat recently, past year or two, as we've seen with COVID, kind of just inviting the wild, wild west of channel conflict and channel disruption. The manufacturers have really dove in, just I'd say really in the past couple of years since COVID, which is startling.
What's driving that, do you think? Is it that their traditional distributors are not participating in or developing good marketplace strategies, and they feel like they need to be in that channel, and so they have no choice? Or do they just care less because there's so much volume going through marketplaces that they're willing to tolerate higher levels of channel conflict?
I mean, it's probably a little mixture of everything, depending on the vertical. I think COVID has, you just saw such a huge acceleration of digital adoption when we were shut down for however many months we were. And it also kind of created somewhat maybe of, a dust storm, right? And has the dust really settled where, you could kind of just blame COVID. Oh, it's COVID.
Right.
When your distributors come to you and say, hey, so like, why are you enabling these manufacturers who are these marketplaces who are directly competitive to my business model, right? And be like, oh, well, COVID. And so you could kind of get away with some things that maybe you wouldn't have been able to just because there's so much chaos going on everywhere. Still is a lot of chaos going on, but the dust hasn't fully settled yet. And now kind of the cat's out of the bag, and now you have the manufacturers a number of them who have done it, or who are actually buying these tech marketplace platform companies outright, and it's now becoming more normalized. And that's the scary thing, right? Is you've now seen many examples of this, much more than I would feel comfortable about. And, as you just see more examples, it becomes more commonplace. It becomes harder for distributors to push back on that. That's to me the gotcha over the past, say, 18 months or so.
Yeah, I remember many years ago in the early 90s when Home Depot was becoming bigger and more powerful, and distributors were really pushing back on their manufacturers. Don't sell through Home Depot. It was this killer channel. We have exclusive distribution deals with you. And then I remember some manufacturers began selling through Home Depot, and the more that did it, the more acceptable and easier it became for everybody else to do it. And after a while, Home Depot, other than a couple of holdouts, like I guess, I think Steel Chainsaws or somebody like that, everybody else just kind of caved in and sold through Home Depot, because ultimately they're going to go where the customers are. And it just feels like marketplaces are a much, much bigger impact version of that.
Yeah, I mean, so, to give so we looked at 15 manufacturers, not even your biggest manufacturers who have done multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. I'm just saying 15 manufacturers who have done deals sub $1 billion. Those 15 manufacturers, and we list them out on a video we did on the show, did more tech M&A than all of B2B distribution combined. So wow. Tech acquisitions, all of B2B distribution combined over the past 5 years. 15 manufacturers, right?
Wow.
And I like deliberately slimmed it down. I could have easily picked. There was multiple billion-dollar tech acquisitions, but I excluded those because it just wouldn't have been fair.
Yeah.
But you're not just seeing this is the interesting. You're not just seeing manufacturers enable product marketplaces, which is one form of platform. You're seeing them buy what I would call collaboration platforms. So, for example, Hilti bought this company called Fieldwire for $300 million. And it's basically a collaboration tool for you when you're on the job site, right? All the different people on the construction site collaborating, kind of doing job site management, workflow management. It's a collaboration tool. And so what they're doing is they're buying technology that's enabling their end customer. And they have an eye to ultimately sell more products to those people. But that's actually not even a product marketplace. We would actually qualify that as what we call a collaboration platform, like a communication platform, right? So you're seeing all kinds of things come out of these manufacturers that are changing the game and introducing new digital business models down in that business customer segment. And some of its marketplace, so Schneider, the big electrical product manufacturer, invested in a marketplace called Reno Run. They had a massive fundraiser somewhat recently. They're basically like the Instacart for same-day construction goods. So, hey, I'm on the job site. I need a bunch of construction, products. And they'll just go to like Home Depot, pick them up, and deliver them to you at the job site. I forgot these 10 things. And Schneider just invested in that company, right? CEMEX Ventures is investing in a bunch of companies. They have a whole ventures arm. So you're just seeing a lot of that stuff in a bunch of different verticals, not just construction, but a lot of things in construction and elsewhere. And it's kicking into next gear because of that.
Yeah, it's those are two interesting cases because Hilti primarily does their own distribution, so they don't have that channel conflict. But Schneider does sell through traditional distribution and through Home Depot, and so they're taking what would appear to be a bigger risk and making a bigger bet because they're trying to facilitate sales with the end user, and feels like a distributor could have made that investment and captured that market share, or at least more of it. But since that wasn't happening, sounds like Schneider did it themselves. And so when you go ahead.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, so I know this deal isn't public yet, but there's another kind of like procurement marketplace startup that just raised money from one of those manufacturers that I named as an investor. They also got money from Procore as an investor, and they would love for a distributor to invest and get involved. But they haven't been able to get a distributor who's interested, right? But Procore put money in, at least one of those manufacturers, Ventures Arms, put money in. And they would love, I told the CEO, I said, hey CEO, how do I know you're not gonna go screw all these distributors? You tell a nice story today, what about tomorrow? And they said, look, we want to work with distributors. We want to work with them. We would love to even give up more governance if a distributor was really interested in, wanted to come on the board, for example. We would love to figure out how to make that work. But it kind of those requests are falling on deaf ears. So I think you're seeing distributors start to lean in, start to do more tech investing. Ferguson is a great example. They've got a ventures arm. Watsco is another great example, both in HVAC. You are seeing some players do it, but as an industry, you're not seeing them do it enough. Right. As compared to what your kind of tech and retail aggressors are doing, and then now as compared to your manufacturers.
Right. Right. And so for when we talk to distributors about their marketplace strategy, the lens they usually look through is which marketplaces should I sell on as a third party, right? And that is a very narrow way to look at a marketplace strategy. When you advise distributors, what are the different options that you take them through? Because you've mentioned investing in marketplaces. We know that they can sell through marketplaces. what is the range of options that they need to consider when they're formulating their strategy?
Yeah, I mean, if you are a smaller or mid-sized distributor, it's going to be more focused around, participating in the disruptive forces, which could be classified as marketplace, as well as then just digitizing your core business, right? So I call kind of two buckets, disruptive innovation and like sustaining innovation. Sustaining innovation is, how do I just enable? What are the startups that can enable my business to get a little bit better? Right. It's not new disruptive. It's just, how do I digitize my business and become more efficient, more tech savvy in the core business? So everyone needs to do the second bucket, sustaining innovation. What are the enabling technologies that can make me operate a little bit better? And so that, as a net impact on this, is everyone needs to be looking at that. The disruptive innovation bucket is very nuanced based upon the vertical and just the competitive advantages your enterprise has. If you're a larger distributor, you have kind of the whole spectrum of options on the table. Should you be buying, investing, strategically partnering, just participating, some mixture of all of those, right? If you're a large distributor, you have multiple business lines, right? You could be, we worked with Dot Foods that bought 2 tech startups recently.
Right.
One more focused on their food service business and one more focused on their retail, their grocery business, right? So you have multiple parts of your business that you could then have different approaches for how do you participate. You could also look at not even saying, you could also look at just saying, how do I enable all the marketplaces to compete against each other, versus trying to pick a winner. And if marketplaces compete, generally that's good for everyone else. So I think there's a lot of ways strategically you can figure out how to chart your way through these. There's a lot of nuance in just marketplace business model as a going concern. There's 10 different strategic business model permutations of what disruption could look like in your industry. How do you figure out what is the right business model, the right strategy for us, and then what's the best way to capture that, right? Build versus partner, invest versus acquire. If you're a smaller or mid-sized player, you don't have as many strategic options on the table if we're talking about how to participate in that disruptive innovation category. And it's going to be more, to your point, Ian, on participating, maybe being a strategic partner based upon what vertical you're in and how much weight you have to throw around. Versus just doing nothing at all and saying, I'm just going to digitize my business and get really good at what we're doing already, right. Which is also a great option to explore. The net catch-all for all of this is the more that marketplaces compete with each other, the more you kick the can down the road, the more you prevent or delay that winner-take-all scenario from becoming a reality.
Right.
And that's when you start to see these platform models take advantage of suppliers. It's only after they reach that point of critical mass. So until that point, they're your best friend. They want to work with you. They want to do whatever they can to get you on board and to get more volumes. So, just keep that in mind in how you engage with these marketplaces. By and large, there are some marketplaces which we could talk to that are friendly to distributors, truly are friendly to distributors.
Right.
Not every marketplace is going to try and take advantage of you in the future. Majority of them probably, yes. So I don't know, there's a lot in there. I rambled, but.
No, it's okay. Look, there are a couple of questions that have come in that are relevant to this discussion and also stuff that we talked about before the call. So someone's saying, Ford mentioned that they're evaluating selling directly to customers to reduce customization of products. I'm not sure what that means. Hopefully you do. Do you think that professional distributors should choose the same strategy, or will they try to continue providing value and solutions? So I think this is a, commoditization of products versus standardization of products versus more complex products question. Do you understand that well enough to try to give it a shot?
Yeah, well, I've covered the Ford story, and I think they're a great example of a manufacturer going direct to the customer, right? And they're using EVs as like their excuse
Yes, right.
as to why they're going to sell direct and try and cram down who's the intermediary, right? If a distributor is the intermediary for a manufacturer and a business customer, the dealer is the intermediary for a car OEM and the consumer, right? And Ford is just using EVs as like an excuse as to why they're going to sell direct and just use that to cram down dealers, which is exactly what's happening. As we're talking about here with manufacturers trying to go direct, enable the disruptors, and cram down distributors. So how do you respond to that? Is Ford is going to put a bunch of protocols into place about what you need to do if you're going to be an EV certified dealer, which basically means you need to be on top of your game, you need to digitize, you need to modernize your core business to stay in Ford's good graces. Otherwise, they're going to use this as an excuse to, deprioritize the laggard dealers, right? So if you're a distributor, I would classify that as that sustaining innovation bucket, right? Improving the core business. I would say differentiating what you sell and kind of that is where these disruptive marketplace type models come in, which is kind of breaking down generally the line of if you are in a vertical B2B distribution, generally, not all the time, generally, there are going to be a broader set of products that your customers would like than what you fulfill today. And one of the core value props of any platform business model, marketplaces included, is to provide a broader, more holistic array of product and selection, right? Whether it's YouTube, watch any video you want, or Amazon, buy any product you want. And so that, to me, that differentiation of product offering is going to be an example of that disruptive innovation. How could you expand or diversify what kind of products you're offering? And maybe you're starting to sell to different customers that do have a more diversified need of product than what you've traditionally been selling. The new services and new services that you can bolt on to your existing offering, to me, that's more of the sustaining innovation bucket. How can you provide more value-added services to your, higher value, larger customers that really need and want those things? That means you got to provide a stickier value prop to them where they stop trying to drive you down to, every cent of products, right? They try and drive down the cost of the product, but they're saying, hey, there's a larger service and value proposition that comes from this distributor, from the product than just purely the product they're selling to me and at what price they're selling it to me. That's kind of how I'd view that kind of adding more services and stickiness bucket. There's a bunch of cool tech startups out there that are trying to enable those additional service offerings for distributors. Versus then this disruptive innovation bucket, which is really that kind of product marketplace channel disruption factor.
Yeah, so I was up in Jasper, Alberta, talking to the Canadian Institute for Plumbing and Heating, and we were talking about, how to succeed online. And what I told them is there's this tendency for distributors to try to remove complexity because it's hard to do complex things online and just sort of dumb down their online offering to SKUs and prices. I said, the problem with that is that's where you're really competing with marketplaces that have more SKUs and lower prices very often because they're putting sellers in competition with each other. And you actually want to, as part of your value proposition, do hard to do things. You want to have a complex value proposition that adds value to more than just purchasing and receiving for the customer. And they turn that into embrace the complexity. And so, I guess my view is for distributors, complexity is your friend because it's differentiating. It's hard to digitize, but to your point, there are a lot of startups that are out there that distributors have no idea exist that can help you deliver complex value propositions that pure marketplaces are not likely to offer anytime soon. And so instead of fleeing the complexity and trying to become like a pure digital online seller, you should actually invest in more complex solutions because you're adding value in ways that marketplaces don't. What do you think of that line of reasoning?
It's 100% correct. I think that is the single thing that every distributor, whether you mess around with marketplace or disruption or not, every distributor should be looking at that. And the unfortunate news is that, there are a lot of startups out there building really interesting things. There's a lot of fluff too. Okay, there's a lot of smoke. So it's very difficult for distributors who have a 100 other things, especially in today's environment, to worry about, to spend the time to really figure out what's real, who's not, who says they can do this, but then I get in there and it doesn't work. And that's very difficult to navigate in the first place. Then you also have Amazon that just launched $1 billion supply chain VC fund. Home Depot did $150 million all in the past 6 weeks. You got the manufacturers who, it's a dime a dozen that have their own venture arm, right? So you got both sides of the aisle trying to incent these startups to solve their problems, a manufacturer's problem, a tech retail disruptor's problems, as opposed to the distributor's problems. But B2B distribution, largest industry in the United States, $8 trillion in size.
Right.
Automotive, we were talking about automotive with Ford, is $1.2 trillion. Okay, this is massive. Right. So there's 8 trillion reasons why startups want to figure this out. But I think we as an industry need to do a better job engaging in that conversation and evaluating and sharing notes and collaborating with each other about, how do we get to the insight faster? Who are the startups that could help me for these reasons and why and how? It's still very early in B2B distribution, and that's exactly where we should all be leaning in. And those are two separate tracks versus kind of disruption over here and just getting better at the core business over here.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, we have no financial agreement with you, Alex. So this is an honest recommendation that's not based on my wallet. If you want help navigating through those choices, you should get a hold of Alex at ajm@applicantlink.com. And I know someone's already asked for your email address in chat and said they're going to reach out to you. I think it must be your producer has put a video on Ford going direct into consumer in chat. And then Lisa Kleinhandler says, one of our favorite marketplace reports from Alex is the Amazon business teardown. So I've watched that. That's a really well done piece. If you want to understand what's going on with Amazon business, you should watch that. We do have another question. Someone's asking, small and medium-sized distributors sometimes choose to start selling on marketplaces because it means a smaller investment than digitizing the whole company. Do you think this is a way to start selling online in B2B?
Yeah, it's a good way to try to understand. It could be a new customer base depending on where your core business is. I don't know. But again, what kind of customer, I'm overgeneralizing here, is going to a marketplace? It's generally going to be your smaller business customers, that spot buy, that transactional demand, as opposed to the contract demand. It's going to be smaller order sizes. It's going to be, they could be looking for products that it could be different than let's say your typical customer in the core business. Right. So I would keep that in mind. Versus if like you were doing e-commerce for your core business, and maybe that e-commerce strategy is again more about just saying, how do I digitize my offering to my existing customers? You could have two very different customer sets of the demand you're going to see from marketplace versus offering like digital purchasing capabilities to your existing customers, right? The fulfillment is another whole part of this thing, which we haven't touched on much, but man, we could have a whole show just talking about that.
Right.
But yeah, that marketplace demand fulfillment expectation also going to be very different than e-commerce fulfillment for, primarily your own customers today.
Right.
So I think it's interesting to try, and I would just behoove you that if you are going to try it with multiple companies not called Amazon, right? Because you don't just want to go to Amazon and enable the beast, right? You want to help the startups. There are a bunch of startup B2B marketplaces. And so if you're going to try it here, you should definitely try it elsewhere. If you just try it with Amazon, you are enabling the enemy at the end of the day.
Yeah, because they've shown that they want to sell their own products and, create private label versions, et cetera.
Sell their own products, cut you out and just go to the manufacturer,
Right.
and any number of things in between that don't help you
Right.
over the long term.
All right. So I have a theory that we're seeing the general marketplaceification of e-commerce, Alex, that, since e-commerce started in a big way in the mid 90s, a URL, a website represented one company and one company's assortment. And increasingly, whether it's a marketplace that has millions of third-party sellers like Amazon, or it's just closed marketplaces where a handful of companies are getting together to pool their assortments, it feels like distributors need to break their paradigm that their name.com represents their company and their assortment, and that they need to start thinking through strategies where their assortment gets pooled with other sellers, so their URL is no longer just them and their assortment. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think you're seeing when you go digital and you go to e-commerce, you're seeing that general desire from the business customer to say, hey, it would be nice to have that one-stop shop dynamic. I get as an overgeneralization.
Yep.
And how do you meet that need? And that's essentially where you're seeing open marketplaces, closed marketplaces, as you referenced, that are not as disruptive, not trying to promote as much kind of open price competition, but still provide that similar dynamic, but to a more finite number of players. So you are seeing different forces try to meet that. You're seeing what we call mass companies, marketplace as a service companies, that are saying, hey, plug in our tool. We will not only give you the capability to go on board your own third-party sellers, which is very difficult and expensive and hard to do, but hey, we will bring you a pre-existing network of third-party sellers, right?
Right.
So you're seeing a lot of companies try and meet that need, which is if I can own the customer, then how can I sell more things to that customer? And ultimately, that's meeting the customer's needs. But there's a lot that goes into actually pulling that off in a delightful way. And I think that's where a lot of people are struggling, which is, yeah, on the surface, it makes sense. Let me sell more stuff to them than I sell to them today. And maybe I don't need to buy and stock hold all that inventory. But then you get into, product data. Do you have accurate product data? And verification of this actually being genuine material. Where are you sourcing it from? How does the pricing work? Generally, the marketplaces are trying to go to smaller third-party sellers and extract margin for themselves, and then fulfillment. And if I have one customer come in, they buy from me and two other third-party sellers, and all that's being shipped from now 3 different places, well, there goes all my margin. So is that really a success for my business, or did I just lose money on that order because I have to pay shipping 2 extra times? So yeah, the challenge gets exponentially more difficult. And the other way I would clarify or classify what you're talking about is to go from what I would call a single tenant environment to a multi-tenant environment is a step order function of difficulty. But why is that happening? Because ultimately the customer wants it. They want more stuff. They want it to be more centralized, more seamless, more easy. And when the customer really wants it that bad and they have the expectation of it from the consumer side of the aisle, it comes.
Yeah, and it seems like we're not going to be able to avoid talking about the logistics side of this a little bit because, I think as products become sort of universally available, I mean, there's hardly any hard to find products anymore. Then you can, it used to be the distributor was sort of the regulator of hard to find products. If they didn't sell it, you'd call them and they'd go source it from somebody. But now there's almost nothing you can't find on a website someplace. And so availability, at least online, is sort of becoming commoditized. And I think that may be one of the reasons you're seeing billions of dollars of investment from Home Depot and Amazon and Walmart in distribution centers, because they want to compete for that last mile delivery. And so my concern for distributors is not only are they slow to figure out their marketplace strategies, they don't realize they're potentially being outflanked by people who are going to win that last mile competition when the battle moves from finding it online to getting into the hands of the customer. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say the last mile delivery, how do I get heavy stuff to the customer, is one of the last areas of very tangible, objective barrier to entry that distributors have. But that's why I think, to what you're talking about with, the Home Depot, the Amazons of the world, and their investment in the last mile, Walmart, Schneider's investment into this Reno Run company, right? Mm-hmm. It's all different ways to try and solve for that. Shipping a bunch of stuff out of regional distribution centers, parcel, within 2 days. No one's really thrown up on that anymore, right? You say, yeah, we got that figured out.
Yeah.
But yeah, the last mile and getting heavy stuff to the customer or perishable stuff to the customer in a reliable way, because I'm working on the job site and I need it there in the morning. And if it's not there in the morning, the crew is sitting by idly, right?
Right.
That's a tough challenge to solve. And it's always a little bit different in every vertical. And yes, so there's a huge amount of investment going into that. Those, I would call those from a product marketplace standpoint, those are what I would call hyper-localized product marketplaces, right? So if I'm trying to sell heavy stuff or perishable stuff that can't be easily, parcel or drop shipped, then I need to focus on finding demand and supply that's hyper-localized, which is essentially, an Instacart, an Uber type of model, very hyper localized core transactions. And so, yeah, there's a lot of investment going into that space up until, today. It's still an area where that CapEx, that hard physical infrastructure, having the trucks, having that last mile capability as a part of your distribution value prop is a very clear differentiator. But yet, a lot of people are also trying to chip away at that. There are some startups that are trying to do last mile fulfillment capabilities in a friendly way to distributors.
Right.
So it's not all bad and disruption. I would say, here's what I would look at is, who are the players that are trying to solve last mile where they're also selling the product? That's disruptive. Versus who's trying to say, hey, here's a way that we could help you solve for last mile better, but as a service offering, as opposed to a product plus service offering. It's coupled. Right. This is the disruptive bucket that I would not want to play with as a distributor. Versus who are the players that are just trying to say, I'm trying to give you better technology so you do your own fulfillment better. I'm trying to bring a tech plus service offering to help you do this better. Okay, that's interesting. That's enabling versus kind of disrupting.
Yeah. Okay. So we are running short on time, but there's one topic I think we need to go into a little bit of depth on, which is that your company, Applico Inc., my company, Distribution Strategy Group, is partnering with the National Association of Wholesale Distributors, which is the parent association for the wholesale distribution industry, to produce a conference on November 2nd and 3rd in Chicago. And it's going to be very exclusive, but there are people on this call who might want to be a part of that. This was your idea. I think it's brilliant. Why don't you describe what we're going to accomplish there?
So we're calling it the Innovator Summit, and we're basically saying, hey, how do I bring the best and brightest tech startups to basically like a pitch day to a closed room of distribution executives and tell them the truth about what they're really doing. Right, so no other tech startups listening to each tech startup's presentation, right? No media. Give me the truth, not the fluff that comes from a normal conference. What are you really doing? How would you want distributors to participate? And we kind of have two tracks. We have a kind of a disruptors track, which is your marketplaces and those kinds of companies that we've been talking about. And then the other track is this enabling track, this, hey, I just want to help you do better in your core business, distributor. And we're getting maybe a couple startups that might be considered competitors. And then you get to listen to both of them. And if you like them, you can schedule, one-on-one time to meet them in a private room and talk further. But if you're familiar with what Y Combinator does, this is basically a YC demo day where the startups at the end of their program pitch to investors. It's kind of that, but startups pitching to distribution executives to help them, again, come closer together. And I think that's a lot of what's lacking. And so in that one little way, we're trying to help bridge that gap.
Yeah, and I already have people asking me for the registration link, which isn't live yet. But if you send Alex or me an email, and I'll show you our email addresses in a second, we'll be sure to get you the link when it is live. Alex, any other words of wisdom before we wrap up today? I mean, I think what jumps out at me is the complexity of the challenge and how immature a lot of distributors are in their thinking about marketplaces. And I don't mean to be pejorative, because I really value what distributors do, but if you're still toying with, I wonder if I should sell on Amazon Business or Zorro, and by the way, I think bad idea Amazon Business, better idea Zorro, personally. But I think, but I think there's a lot more to it than that, right? I mean, should you be making investments? What are the services that you should be adding to make your complexity more likely to sell on a marketplace and to build better connections with customers? Are there tech startups you should be meeting with? I mean, there's just a whole bunch to consider here. And my guess is most distributors don't even have a strategic framework to know what decisions they need to make. Is that your experience when you work with them?
It's tough. There's just so much going on. Just, for the past 2 years, it's been, can I just get the product? Now, I think we're in a recession. No one wants to say that yet, but it's been 2 quarters. Last quarter is definitely declined. So yeah. I think we're officially in a recession. And now you say, oh, well, now that my demand is going away, you're just shifting so many gears. And so I would say we, as our roles, how could we do a better job of helping to provide some shortcuts to distributors to help them weed through that thinking. So we tried to do that around B2B financing. There's a lot of B2B right. fintech companies that we published a report on a few months ago, right? And but we can help narrow the pool of players, but then you need to kind of walk down that path and say, hey, what could this do for my business, and spend the time there. So it's a two-way street. I think we can do a better job helping to lean more into this and communicate on what we're seeing happening and who are the players in this. It's still early, but we also need distributors to dedicate more time and resources to work with these startups. Because if we don't support them, they're going to go elsewhere. They're going to go to the manufacturers. They're going to go to the Amazons and Home Depots and their $1.15 billion in VC money.
Right.
And that's where they're going to go. And so I don't think we're there yet. I do think B2B marketplaces have a more competitive hold than what we saw at Amazon and B2C, right? So we are seeing B2B trend a little bit better, but again, those B2B marketplaces generally are disruptors, and that's where all the VC money generally has gone in B2B distribution, is to fund the disruptors, not these enablers that we're talking about now.
Right.
So there's some good, there's some bad, but I think, how do we as an industry really lean in and say, hey, look, we're gonna have to stumble. Right? Some of this stuff isn't gonna work. We might suggest something and we get it wrong. You might try something and it doesn't work. But we need to take some more risk. Otherwise, we're going to be too stagnant.
Yeah, we can't stand still. So, like I said, if you're interested in that conference in Chicago on November 2nd and 3rd, you can email Alex at agm@ablicoinc.com, or you can email me at iheller@distributionstrategy.com. We'll make sure you get the registration link when it comes around. We do have a couple of upcoming programs. We're covering sales analytics and distribution. Senthil Gunasekaran will be doing that. He's with ActVantage. That's on July 13th, sponsored by Optimizely, Connexium, Oracle NetSuite, and Cavallo. On July 20th, related to this conversation, we'll have Eric Hopland, who's the CEO of the National Association of Wholesaler Distributors, on our show as our guest. That's brought to you by Epicor. That'll be a great follow-on to this conversation. Our contact information is on the screen, but Alex, thank you so much for making time to be with us today. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience did as well.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
You bet. Look forward to talking to you again soon. Look forward to producing this conference with you. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Thanks for Epicor for sponsoring this episode of the Wholesale Change Show. And we'll see you next time on one of our webcasts or on the next episode. Thanks, everyone. Bye now.